Out on the Wyoming plains, a good man can lose everything in the space of one misunderstood moment. Sometimes it doesn't come with a gunshot or a shouted threat. Sometimes it arrives quiet, dressed like help, and leaves behind a picture that tells the wrong story forever. The kind of moment that can get a man hanged and a young woman ruined without either of them meaning for it to happen. Before the next minute was over, somebody was going to ride away with a story, and it wouldn't be the truth. The plains near Laramie lay open and wide under a pale morning sun, grass bending slow in the breeze, nothing to hide behind and nowhere to disappear. That was where Clara ended up. Half twisted against a fallen cottonwood, the bark rough against her shoulder, the earth cold beneath her palms. Her dress was clenched tight in both fists like it was the only thing keeping her, anchored to herself. Her eyes were wide and glass bright, her mouth parted, breath catching in short, uneven pulls. And she looked like she'd just watched the devil ride up smiling and tip his hat. Silas knelt close enough that from a distance it would already look wrong. An older rancher with skin baked dark by sun and wind, hands heavy and scarred from years of fence wire and rains, he looked like the sort of man people trusted until they didn't. His bandana was already twisted in his fingers, knuckles pale, his breathing fast like he'd been running inside his own ribs. That wasn't desire driving it. It was the clock ticking loud in his blood. It wasn't hunger. It was urgency, the kind that makes a man move before his pride has time to speak. Clara's knee jerked when his hand shifted closer to her thigh. Not touching, just moving, and she flinched like a blow was coming. She didn't scream because screaming didn't stop men out here. She didn't beg because begging only fed the wrong kind of hunger. Instead, she swallowed hard, jaw set, rage and fear shaking through her like a wire pulled too tight. She lifted the hem of her dress with a trembling hand and said the words that could destroy them both. "If you want to, just do it." She said it flat, like someone who had already decided all men were the same and she was done hoping otherwise. Silas froze. For one sharp second, the whole world seemed to hold its breath. The grass still, the wind pausing, even the horse tied back on the rise flicking an ear and going quiet. Then the truth showed itself plain as daylight. 2 puncture marks close together, angry red against pale skin, swelling already spreading fast under sun-warmed flesh. A rattlesnake bite, fresh enough that panic still had teeth in it. Silas felt the cold drop in his gut that came with knowing exactly how bad that could turn. He knew the venom was serious, but he also knew a crowd could kill faster than poison ever would if they thought they had a reason. He pulled his hand back slow, palms open where she could see them, and his voice hardened with urgency, not anger. To move, miss. Don't fight me. I'm trying to keep you breathing." Behind them, the sound came faint at first, almost imagined. Hoofbeats, distant but gathering, brushing through the grass like a warning. Then steadier, then sure. And if 3 riders crested that low rise right now, the venom wouldn't be the worst thing reaching her first, because the next thing Silas had to do to save her, life would look exactly like the thing that could get him killed. Out here, folks didn't wait for facts. They waited for a picture they could repeat. A girl with her skirt up meant one story, an older man on his knees meant another, and a rope never asked which one was true. Clara hadn't started that day planning to be alone on the plains with poison in her leg and a stranger on his knees in front of her. She had come west on a promise written clean and polite, the kind of letter that talked about honest work, decent shelter, and a fresh start where a woman could stand up straight without someone deciding what she was worth. Less than an hour earlier, she'd stood at a ranch near Laramie with dust on, her shoes and Hope still doing most of the walking for her. The man who greeted her smiled easy and spoke soft, the kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself to be obeyed. Then he'd ordered a door shut like she was livestock being counted. Something in his eyes had gone flat, measuring instead of seeing. He talked like a man used to getting his way without lifting a hand, the sort who called it protection while he closed the door. When Clara heard the latch click, clean and final, she understood she was about to become a line on somebody else's paper. She didn't argue. She ran. She heard boots on porch boards behind her and a man's voice calling her back, calm as if he were calling a dog that had slipped its leash. She tore through fence wire that ripped at her dress, through grass tall enough to hide snakes and men both, lungs burning, heart pounding louder than her steps. Somewhere in that blind sprint, pain struck her thigh like a hot nail driven deep, but fear carried her farther than pain ever could. When her legs finally gave out, she fell hard beside the cottonwood, yanking her skirt up to protect herself from whatever might come next. That was how Silas found her. And that was why, when he knelt beside her now, she didn't see a rescuer. She saw the last danger she might survive. Silas hadn't ridden out that morning looking for trouble. And he sure as hell hadn't been looking for a woman. He was a rancher checking fence lines. The kind of work that keeps a man alive by habit more than hope. But when he saw Clara on the ground, skin gone pale and body shaking, something old and sharp woke up in him. Not desire, urgency. The kind that comes when you've seen calves die from snakebite, and once a young hand who didn't make it because help came late. Silas didn't talk about courage and he didn't ask permission. He worked. He cut the outer layer of her dress, just enough to keep the cloth from binding the swelling. His knife steady, eyes fixed on the wound and nowhere else. He wrapped his bandana firm around her leg, close enough to help, loose enough to keep blood moving. He'd buried one good man over less, and he wasn't about to watch it happen again while he still had hands to use. Clara watched every move, muscles locked, waiting for betrayal that never came. He'd seen men try old tricks with knives and mouths, and he'd seen how ugly that turned. He wasn't here to play brave. He was here to buy her time. He kept his body angled so the planes could see his hands, not her skin. One wrong witness could turn help into a hanging, and he could already feel eyes on him even before the riders showed their faces. That confused her more than fear. Then Silas heard it again. Closer now. Hoofbeats. 3 riders this time. Not wandering, not lost. Moving like men who knew exactly what they were coming for. Silas straightened a fraction. Jaw tight, already measuring distance, time and poison. If this kind of hard choice story is your kind of ride, stay with me. Because the next decision Silas makes doesn't just risk his life, it risks his name. Silas leaned closer, keeping his hands where Clara could see them, his voice low and steady. "Miss, I don't know what you ran from," he said, "but it's riding this way, and that bite won't wait." Clara tried to pull back, pride fighting pain, pain winning fast. Her legs screamed when she moved, tears flashing despite her teeth clenched tight. Silas didn't curse her for it. He shifted, planting himself between her and the open plains like a fence post driven on purpose. That was when she noticed something predators never do. He kept his eyes off her, fixed on the grass where the sound was coming from. The hoofbeats were close enough now to carry weight. 3 horses keeping pace like they'd practiced it. Silas glanced once toward the low rise where his horse was tied. 30 yards of open ground. If he ran for it, he might draw fire. If he stayed, they'd be found. And if he lifted her onto his saddle, anyone watching would tell the story wrong by sundown. He exhaled through his nose, the sound of a man stepping past the last safe thought. "I'm going to get my horse," he said. Clara's eyes widened. "You're leaving?" He shook his head once. "No, ma'am. I'm gambling my whole life on not leaving." He moved low through the grass, reached the reins, and led the horse back the same way, heart hammering hard enough to hurt. When he returned, he didn't grab Clara like cargo. He braced, guided, lifted her slow and careful, breath by breath from a distance, with her skirt hiked and his hands on her where the world could see. It would look wrong, dead wrong. By sundown, the story would be all over Laramie. Old Silas taking advantage of a helpless girl. A lie like that traveled faster than any horse he owned, and once it took root, even a good deed couldn't pull it out. He settled himself. Behind the saddle, one arm steady around Clara, the other holding the reins like they were the last honest thing left. He didn't look back at the riders. He didn't hurry more than the horse could stand. He rode like a man who knew panic made more graves than bullets. As the plains stretched out behind them, Clara's breathing slowed, and Silas felt the full weight of the choice he'd already made. He hadn't chosen safety. He'd chosen to stand beside someone when walking away would have been easier. That kind of decision followed a man longer than tracks in the dust. He didn't know yet how far it would follow him, only that there was no turning back now. The horse moved steady beneath them, hooves placing careful as if it understood the balance it carried. Silas kept his arm firm but not tight around Clara, enough to keep her upright without trapping her, his other hand low on the reins, guiding rather than forcing. The riders were behind them now, close enough that the sound of leather and breath carried clear through the morning air. Clara felt every step in her leg like a pulse of fire, venom working its way through her blood with a patient, ugly purpose. She focused on breathing, because it was the only thing that felt like it still belonged to her. Silas felt the tremor in her body and adjusted without comment, angling the saddle just enough to take pressure off the swelling. He didn't look back, but he knew they were there. He could feel eyes on him the way a man feels weather changing before. The sky admits it. The riders didn't shout at first. They let the picture speak for itself. A girl slumped in front of an older man, her skirt hitched, his arm around her. That was all some folks ever needed. One of them finally called out, voice carrying easy and sharp all at once, like a blade drawn slow. "Hold up there." Silas eased the horse to a stop because running would only feed the wrong story. He turned just enough so they could see his face. Weathered and calm, not guilty and not afraid. "Morning," he said. "She's been bit." "Needs help." The riders spread without being told. 3 men moving like they'd done this before, flanking him wide enough to box him in. One of them was younger, eyes quick and eager, already writing the ending in his head. Another was heavyset, mustache stiff with wax, the sort who liked order as long as he got to define it. The third hung back a touch, older, watching more than speaking. The young one's gaze dropped straight to Clara's leg, then snapped up to her face. "You hurt, miss?" Clara swallowed. "Yes. Snake." The word came out thin but clear. The mustached man snorted. "Funny place to be tending wounds." Silas kept his voice even. "She ran into it. I found her after. I'm taking her to town." The young rider leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Funny how things look sometimes." Silas nodded once. "Funny and deadly. That's why I didn't leave her." The older rider finally spoke, slow and measured. "Let's see the bite." Silas didn't hesitate. He shifted just enough to let the wound show. Red and swollen, the punctures unmistakable. The older man leaned closer, squinting. "That's real enough," he said. "But stories don't end at the bite, do they?" Silas met his eyes. "No, they don't. They end with whether a person lives long enough to tell the truth." Clara felt Silas's arm tense, not with anger, but with readiness. The young rider laughed once, sharp. "Maybe she ought to come with us. We'll make sure she gets seen." Silas shook his head. "You don't have a doctor?" "I do." The mustached man bristled. "You accusing us of something, old man?" Silas kept his gaze level. "I'm accusing the snake, nothing more." The pause stretched, heavy as a held breath. Clara could feel sweat running down her spine, cold despite the sun. The venom made her dizzy, edges of the world blurring, but she forced herself to stay present. She didn't want to fade while men decided what she was worth. The older rider looked from Silas to Clara and back again. Finally, he tipped his chin. "Go on then, but don't think we won't be asking around." Silas nodded once, not grateful, not defiant. "Wouldn't expect anything else." He turned the horse and rode on, pace unchanged. They didn't follow, but Clara could feel their eyes on her back long after the sound of hooves faded. When they were finally alone with the wind and the grass, her strength sagged. Silas felt it and tightened his hold just enough. "Stay with me," he said quietly. She nodded against his arm, words slipping away. The ride stretched longer than it should have, every mile dragging like wet cloth. Silas talked then, not to fill the air, but to anchor her. He told her his name again, told her about the creek ahead, about the doctor in town who owed him a favor from years back. He spoke like a man laying boards across a river, one careful sentence at a time. Clara listened, catching pieces, letting his voice pull her forward when her body wanted to fold inward. When the town finally came into view, low buildings crouched against the open land. Relief hit her so hard it made her dizzy, but relief didn't erase fear. Towns had eyes. Towns had mouths. Silas slowed as they rode in. Straight-backed, visible, making no attempt to hide what couldn't be hidden. People turned. Some stared. Some whispered. A woman on a porch froze mid-sweep, eyes widening. A man at the hitching rail frowned, already weighing the look of it. Silas rode straight to the doctor's place and swung down first. Careful how he moved. Then helped Clara down with the same deliberate patience he'd used in the field. The doctor came out quick, took one look at the leg, and ushered her inside without asking questions. Silas stayed back, hands in sight, dust on his boots, waiting. Inside, pain and medicine blurred together for Clara. The doctor worked fast. practiced, muttering under his breath. When it was done, she lay back, exhausted, alive. When Silas was finally allowed in, he stood awkward near the door. "Hatin Hunt." "You saved my life," she said, voice rough. He shook his head. "Snake didn't take it. That's all." The doctor snorted. "Don't sell it short." She'd have been gone by nightfall. Silas nodded once and turned to leave like that was the end of it. It wasn't. Outside, the story was already walking ahead of him, changing shape with every step. He could feel it in the looks, the way conversations paused when he passed. He mounted his horse and rode out of town alone, shoulders set. Clara watched from the window, a tight ache settling in her chest that had nothing to do with venom. She knew then that surviving was only the first part. What came next would follow them both. Silas rode back to his land under a sky gone wide and empty again, knowing the plains remembered everything, even when people didn't want to. He had chosen his line and crossed it. Whatever came after would come honest or not at all. Silas rode home with the sun slipping westward, the light turning the plains the color of old brass. The land looked the same as it always had, fences stretching thin across miles of grass, cattle moving slow and unbothered, the wind carrying nothing but itself. But the quiet felt different now, heavier, like it was holding something back. He unsaddled his horse, rubbed it down by habit, fed it without really seeing it, and went about the evening work the same way he always had. A man didn't keep a ranch running by stopping every time the world tilted. Still, every creak of leather, every distant sound carried an edge. He knew how stories moved. They didn't ride straight. They drifted, bent by whoever caught them first. By the next morning, he felt it before he heard it. A neighbor rode up slower than usual, didn't swing down right away. "Morning, Silas," he said, eyes sliding past him like they didn't want to land. "Heard you had some excitement yesterday." Silas kept his hands busy with the gate latch. That's one word for it. The man shifted. "Folks in town are talking. Girl come in pretty rough." Silas nodded. "Snake don't ask permission." The neighbor cleared his throat. "Some are saying you were awful close to her when you brought her in." Silas finally looked at him then, not angry, not pleading. "Close enough to keep her alive. That ought to be the whole of it." The neighbor held his gaze a moment, then looked away. "I figured as much. Still, you know how it goes." Silas knew exactly how it went. By noon, the talk had reached the sort of ears that liked to repeat it louder. By evening, a man he barely knew rode out under the excuse of buying a calf, and left with more interest in Silas's answers than his stock. Silas gave him nothing extra, nothing to twist. But he could feel the net tightening anyway. Meanwhile, Clara lay in a small room in town, the bite wrapped clean, her legs stiff and aching, her body weak but mending. Word reached her, too, carried in sideways looks and half-spoken sentences. She heard her name paired with Silas's, heard pauses. Where judgment lived, the doctor's wife tried kindness and failed at hiding curiosity. Clara understood then that survival didn't come with privacy. She asked after Silas and got careful answers. "He's fine," he's keeping to himself. That only made the weight in her chest worse. She hadn't run from one cage to sit quietly in another built out of whispers. When she could stand, she did. When she could walk, she insisted. On the fourth day, she left town with a borrowed horse and directions nobody offered outright. The ride hurt. Every step of the horse pulled at her leg, but she rode anyway, jaw set, because some debts couldn't be paid from a bed. When Silas saw her coming up the rise, he thought at first the heat was playing tricks on him. Then he recognized the way she held herself, stiff but determined. He stood still and waited. She reined in a few yards away. "I heard what they're saying," she said, not bothering with greetings. Silas nodded. "I figured you would." "They're wrong," she said. He studied her face, saw the resolve there. The same iron that had carried her through pain and fear. "Truth doesn't always outrun talk," he said. She swung down carefully, then let it walk behind me for once. She told him then about the ranch, the letter, the door, the boots on the porch. She didn't soften it or sharpen it. She told it straight. Silas listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every word. When she finished, the plains felt even quieter. "Folks need to hear it from you," she said. "From me, they'll call it excuse. From you, they'll call it shame." He met her eyes. "You don't owe me that." She shook her head. "I owed the truth, and I owe it to myself." The town meeting came quicker than either of them wanted. Not official, not lawful, Just people gathering where people always did when they decided something needed judging. Silas stood alone at first, hat in hand. Then Clara stepped up beside him, leaning on a cane, legs still stiff. A murmur rolled through the crowd. She spoke before anyone else could. She told them everything. About the letter. About the door. About the run. About the snake. About waking to see a man on his knees who never once looked at her like he owned her. Some listened. Some didn't. The man from the ranch wasn't there. His absence spoke loud enough. When she finished, the silence was thick and uncomfortable. Silas said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth stood on its own legs, even if it limped. The crowd broke slow. Some nodded at Silas on their way out. Some wouldn't meet his eye. He knew then that his name would never be clean the way it had been. But it wouldn't be entirely broken either. Clara left town that night, not running this time, but choosing. Silas watched her go with a feeling he couldn't name, something between relief and loss. The planes swallowed her figure the way they always did. Silas turned back to his work, knowing the hardest part was never the moment itself, but living with it afterward. The planes settled back into themselves the way they always did, slow and indifferent, as if nothing worth remembering had happened. But Silas felt it in the small things, in the way a rider paused too long at his fence line, in the way a handshake came with an extra second of testing pressure, or didn't come at all. He went on mending wire, checking stock, rising before light and laying down after dark, because that was what a man did when there were no clean endings to be had. Some mornings he woke certain he'd hear boots on his porch, voices asking questions that had already decided their answers. Other mornings passed quiet, and that almost felt worse, like the land itself was waiting to see which version of him would stick. Clara rode east for a time, then turned north, then west again, choosing roads that belonged to her, not to promises written by strangers. Her leg healed slow, a reminder she carried with her, but it didn't slow her will. Wherever she stopped, she worked, and wherever her name was spoken, she told her story plain. Sometimes people listened. Sometimes they smiled tight and changed the subject. She learned that truth didn't need permission to exist, but it did need a spine. Months later, word drifted back to Silas in pieces, carried by travelers and chance meetings. She'd taken work at a place that paid fair. She didn't scare easy anymore. He nodded when he heard it, said little, and felt something settle in his chest that had been restless since the day by the cottonwood. The riders from that morning became just another memory for most folks, but not for Silas. He remembered the way the picture had almost been enough to end him. He remembered how close right and wrong could stand without touching. He knew now that a man's name wasn't something you defended once and forgot. It was something you lived into every day, whether anyone was watching or not. The town never made things official. There was no apology, no clearing of air. Life simply moved on, uneven and imperfect. Silas kept his land. He kept his habits. He kept his name, though it bore a scar only he could see. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, he thought of the cottonwood, of the girl with venom in her leg and fire in her eyes, and of the moment when walking away would have been easier. He knew then, as he knew now, that the choices that define us rarely announce themselves. They arrive quiet, dressed like trouble, and leave us to carry the cost long after the dust has settled. Out on the Wyoming plains, a good man can lose everything in the space of a misunderstood moment, or he can choose to stand, knowing the truth may never fully catch up. And sometimes that has to be enough.